It was just past midnight on June 18, 2024, when the call came into the U.S. Coast Guard station in Key West. The dispatcher's voice was urgent, almost incredulous. "We've got baby turtles heading the wrong way. Hundreds of them." At first, the crew thought it was a mistake. They were used to calls about overturned fishing skiffs, drug runners caught with bales of cocaine, or migrants adrift in rafts. But this, turtles? Still, within minutes, a truck was rolling south toward Marathon, Florida. Inside, 6 Coast Guardsmen rode in silence, unsure of what exactly they would find. The scene that greeted them was unlike anything they had faced. Under a swollen half-moon, the beach was alive with movement, tiny dark shapes dragging themselves across the sand. Sea turtles, newly hatched, no bigger than the palm of a hand. Their flippers slapped against the grains in desperate rhythm. But instead of turning toward the whisper of the Atlantic surf, they marched inland, toward the glow of man-made lights. And those lights were brutal. Across the dunes, an illegal warehouse had left its floodlamps burning, blazing brighter than the stars. Sodium arcs hissed, casting long shadows over the beach. To the hatchlings, it was irresistible. Instinct told them to follow the brightest horizon. Evolution had designed them to find moonlight over the ocean. Instead, they were crawling toward asphalt, neon bars, and the roar of distant traffic. Chief Petty Officer Ramirez crouched low, flashlight beam cutting across the sand. He followed the hatchling tracks, hundreds of delicate lines scored into the surface, all pointing the wrong way. He had seen smuggling tunnels, wrecked drug boats, even migrant rafts half-sunk in storms. But this was life itself, betraying its own survival. "They're marching into death," he said softly. The team moved quickly. Buckets, gloves, even empty gear bags were pressed into service. Sailors knelt in the sand, scooping hatchlings by the handful, their bodies soft, their shells delicate as porcelain. Some of the turtles twitched weakly, exhausted from crawling. Others had already collapsed at the edge of the parking lot, their tiny bodies drying in the heat that still clung to the asphalt even after midnight. But there were too many. For every turtle lifted, 10 more scuttled inland. The floodlights blazed on, pulling them away from their true destiny. Ramirez keyed his radio, requesting backup. "We've got hundreds, maybe 1,000. His voice carried the urgency of a combat report, but the enemy here was confusion, not bullets. Within minutes, reinforcements arrived. Environmental officers, local volunteers, even off-duty coasties who had heard the chatter over the radio and rushed out in jeans and t-shirts. Together, they fanned out across the sand, forming a human barricade. One by one, they intercepted hatchlings, turning them gently toward the sea. And the sea was waiting. Only 100 yards away, the Atlantic rolled in gentle waves, the perfect nursery for these creatures. But the sound of the surf was drowned out by the humming generators and crackling lamps. To the turtles, the false light was stronger, louder, impossible to ignore. One officer found the power source and yanked free a thick cable. Sparks leapt, and half the beach plunged into darkness. For a moment, silence reigned. Then something extraordinary happened. The hatchlings on that stretch pivoted, all at once, tiny heads turning. As if guided by an ancient compass, they began to crawl seaward. Hundreds of small bodies churned the sand, a living tide moving toward the foam. Cheers erupted. Sailors clapped one another on the shoulders, their faces glowing in the dim moonlight. For the first time that night, victory seemed possible. But the battle wasn't won. More hatchlings emerged every minute, stumbling over dune grass, scattering in every direction. The team had to keep working, faster, harder. Buckets filled and emptied again. Sailors jogged the 100 yards to the surf, kneeling to let the hatchlings slip into the foam. Tiny silhouettes disappeared under curling waves, their journey just beginning. Each release was a spark of hope, but behind them, more lines scored the sand, endless hatchlings still being born into confusion. By 2 a.m., the beach had become a war zone of a different kind. Not bullets and bombs, but life against death, instinct against deception. The Coast Guard fought with hands and heart, racing against time, against fatigue, against the merciless lure of artificial light. For the men and women kneeling in the sand, it was clear, this was more than a rescue. It was a test of resolve. And tonight, the future of hundreds, maybe thousands, of lives depended on them. By 2:15 a.m., the rescue on the beach looked more like a battlefield than a conservation effort. Coast Guardsmen, volunteers, and biologists moved in a constant rhythm, kneeling, lifting, carrying, releasing. Buckets clattered, radios crackled, and the hiss of the surf mixed with shouts of coordination. Every few minutes, another cluster of hatchlings broke free from the sand, their tiny flippers thrashing, their lives hanging in the balance. Chief Ramirez barked orders like he was commanding a boarding party. "Keep the lights off. Watch the asphalt. Don't let them cross the line." His voice carried across the dunes, rallying everyone to the task. And still, the flood lamps from the illegal warehouse blazed, drawing hatchlings inland like a cruel magnet. Finally, a Coast Guard electrician crawled behind the building and found the main junction box. With a quick flick of his multi-tool, the humming stopped. Darkness claimed the shore, broken only by the moon and the sweep of flashlights. The effect was immediate. Hundreds of hatchlings, confused and circling in the sand, suddenly reoriented. Heads turned seaward. One after another, they began to crawl toward the ocean, an unstoppable tide of life. Cheers erupted, but no one stopped working. Sailors carried buckets heavy with squirming hatchlings. Volunteers formed a chain to pass containers hand to hand down to the surf. At the water's edge, men and women knelt, tipping their buckets and watching as dozens of tiny silhouettes vanished into foam. Each release felt like a miracle. The beach itself seemed to transform. Where moments before chaos had ruled, now order and direction returned. The moonlight lit the path across the sand, and thousands of tracks pointed in the right direction. For the first time all night, instinct and destiny were aligned again. Still, the work was exhausting. Knees ached, backs screamed, sweat-soaked uniforms. The sand clung to gloves and skin, gritty and wet. But no one slowed down. Every hatchling mattered. Every trip to the surf was a victory. By 3:30 a.m., the final nest erupted. Dozens of tiny shells cracked, releasing the last wave of hatchlings. Sailors knelt quietly, almost reverently, as the creatures clawed their way free. It was as if the beach itself was exhaling its final breath of life for the night. Carefully, gently, they were gathered and guided, their flippers beating against human palms until, at last, they touched saltwater. When the last hatchling disappeared beneath the surf, silence spread. The team stood together in the moonlight, looking out at the Atlantic. Hundreds, maybe thousands, of lives had been saved. For a moment, the war against cartels and traffickers felt far away. Here, the enemy had been false light and human negligence. And the Coast Guard had fought with patience instead of weapons. The illegal warehouse was shut down before dawn, fined heavily, its lights permanently disabled. But the memory that stayed was not the paperwork or the penalties. It was the sight of hatchlings crawling into waves, the knowledge that generations of sea turtles might now survive because a few men and women refused to stand by. Back at the station, the crew logged the event like any other mission: time of call, personnel dispatched, result achieved. Yet for those who had been there, the meaning was deeper. This was what it meant to wear the uniform, not just to fight smugglers or chase down fast boats, but to defend life in all its fragile forms. The Coast Guard are often seen as enforcers of maritime law, intercepting drugs, boarding suspicious vessels, rescuing stranded fishermen. But on that night, they proved something greater. They are guardians, not only of coastlines, but of the living creatures that depend on them. Whether it's pulling migrants from a storm, towing a capsized boat, or carrying baby turtles to the ocean, the mission is the same: protect life, whatever form it takes. As dawn broke, painting the horizon in gold and crimson, the exhausted team lingered on the sand. They had fought through darkness, through confusion, through exhaustion. And they had won. The hatchlings were gone, carried into the vastness of the sea, each tiny swimmer a testament to resilience. For Chief Ramirez, the lesson was clear. We can't control what the ocean gives us, he said quietly. But we can control how we respond. And that response, whether against cartels, storms, or even the lure of a false light, was always the same: act with courage, act with humanity. So the next time you see a headline about the Coast Guard intercepting a drug boat or rescuing a stranded ship, remember this night. Remember the hatchlings saved by tired hands and steady hearts. Because sometimes the most extraordinary battles are not fought with guns or missiles, but with buckets, flashlights, and the unshakable will to protect life.